We are here with Bethany Mandel. Very, very exciting and meaningful week. Bethany Mandel is the co-founder of Shields Communications PR and the co-founder of the Substack, Mom War Substack. And most importantly, sometimes our professional jobs are what's important, but most importantly, this week, she's come a bit into the spotlight, even though a lot of the work she's been doing is behind the scenes. In her work to free the Israeli hostages, it's been, in a way, a nightmare because the entire Jewish people have been horrified by everything that's been happening. But also, this week has been a week of a lot of hope because we did see three hostages coming out. So, first of all, welcome and thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. So I know there are things you cannot tell us because of the nature of what's going on, and there's still 90 hostages in, but you've been really accompanying families of hostages from very early on. You've been there, I've seen on Capitol Hill. You've been advocating for the hostages in Washington. So take us to the days, or even the very day of, since October 7th, how you came to this topic and just share with us some of this journey because so much of it has been behind the scenes and so much of it is still in the making.
Yeah. So I got a call from my best friend that morning on October 7th. I think at it was my husband was still asleep, so it was pretty early. And she called me repeatedly, which she never does, and she knew it was Shabbos and she knew I wouldn't answer, but I did answer because she called me repeatedly and I knew she wouldn't do that lightly. And she told me, the bare bones of there was a horrible attack. People are being dragged into Gaza. And I woke my husband up and I told him what she had relayed to me. And then it was just, that first day that everyone had, that horrible first day where we're sort of hearing things and I think I might have turned my phone on early, honestly. I think I did because it was a 3-day Yentif. It wasn't Sunday a Yentif also.
You know what? I can't remember. I think it was, um,
Wasn't it Thursday,
I think
Friday,
it,
Saturday?
I think it was I'm not sure. I do remember like we turned on our phones like the second it was
Yeah,
after, and it was a 3 day yontif. And you know what? I guess before we talk about all
I
this, I
know.
think I'm still traumatized because like we were asking the security guard near the shul
Yes,
for what's going
us too.
on. And then we asked the nanny what's going on. And I think part of the trauma has been for me the not knowing what's going on. And yes,
Yes.
Israelis have also been in trauma because nobody knew what was going on. We're still trying to
Yeah.
figure out exactly what went down that day. But I think the like not knowing and not being able to look at your phone is still
Yeah.
something I'm dealing with. And
Me
and
too.
yeah, it's
I,
it's
I have
like
a, I have a friend who he has a photo frame in his kitchen and he sets it to the times of Israel on Shabbos so that he can
wow.
see because the anxiety was just destroying him every Shabbos. And so many things have happened on Shabbos. That initial terrifying missile attack from Tehran that happened on Shabbos. There's been a lot of Shabbos things. But anyway, I think I turned my phone on early. Um, and I had a friend who was doing media work. I've always been on the front end of the camera. I've never and writing for myself. I've never been on the back end, and I've never done PR or anything before October 7th. And I had a friend who was doing this work already, and so I messaged her and said, "How can I help you?" And I remember that the day that everyone's phones turned on, I think it was Sunday or Monday, I put on my Instagram stories my cell phone number and I said, WhatsApp me if you have family that are affected. And I woke up to over 1,000 messages. And
Wow.
I'm very grateful that no one abused the fact that I posted my phone
Hmm.
number. Um, and I got messages from people. Oh gosh, so many messages.
Wow.
There was
Meaning how, meaning they are living in Israel
yeah.
and they're contacting you because what?
Because I said I work in media and I'm here to help you, however I can
Hmm.
help you. And so I'm thinking of the initial families that I was in contact with, those first. week or two.
Hmm.
And I was helping them writing op-eds. I was helping them get booked on TV, on and on radio,
Hmm.
because I have all those producer contacts and all those booker contents because I go on TV very frequently. And so of those families that I initially spoke to that first week, one of them they discovered his it was his son, and he was at Nova and they discovered his body a couple days later. And he was supposed to be on Fox and Friends, and we couldn't get in touch with him that morning. And I said, I think I know why, because they had found they had
Hmm.
found some bodies, and I had a feeling it was his son, and it was.
Hmm.
Um, there was another man who I set up for a Fox News interview, and he had a nervous breakdown, and Fox never used the interview. Um,
Wow.
and he was saying, because there was rockets that were falling, and
Hmm.
he said, I'm sitting in a lawn chair and I hope it hits me. And his
Wow.
father was taken, and his father was killed in captivity. But at the time, he didn't know where anyone was. He didn't know what was happening. Um, so it felt a little bit like therapy also.
Hmm.
Um, there was another family. She was initially presumed to be taken hostage, and then they found her body booby trapped in her house about a week later. Um, and Roni Eshel, she was taken from, well, she wasn't taken from Nakalos. She was in Nakalos
Hmm.
and burned beyond recognition, and it took them 6 or 7 weeks. But I worked with her family very intensely those first 6 or 7 weeks, and she's
Hmm.
presumed to be a hostage until they identified fragments, bone fragments.
I know her
Um,
father is still very active asking for a state
yes,
commissioned
yes.
investigation.
Yeah. So I helped her family a lot. A lot of those initial op-eds that you see, like in the New York Post and local papers, I helped her family with those. And then they were on television as well. I helped them with those. Um, I think that those were the initial families that I helped. And I never worked with the Hostage Family Forum. It was just sort of a word of mouth thing among
Hmm.
families after I made first contact with a lot of those families. It was like, how did you get that New York Post story? Oh, this woman from America helped me. Here's her number.
Hmm.
And that was sort of how it started.
Wow.
Oh yeah, yeah. And then it was just, people that I knew in Israel who had made Aliyah. It was like her
Hmm.
cousin or his cousin. That's sort of how it went. And I have a
Hmm.
friend here where I live in Maryland, and she's an Israeli influencer. She's like a she has like 30,000 Instagram
Hmm.
followers, and she posted, my friend Bethany is, a media expert and happy to help. And a lot of people contacted me that way also. That was about a week and a half in. And so a lot of Nova families, actually. That was how I got to know a lot
Hmm.
of Nova families. Um, and then I have a friend who was helping the IDF procure uh, not IDF, like soldiers. The IDF actually
Hmm.
were extremely unhelpful, but he was helping individual soldiers procure helmets and vests,
Hmm.
and he became friends with the brother of Carmel Gott, and so I worked a lot with Carmel's brother, doing Hill stuff and media work until unfortunately, she was murdered at the end of
Hmm.
August. So and then there was another family that, thank God, that was a good one. He flew over on the private jet of an Israeli astronaut, and they gave me about 24 hours notice, and they said, we're coming to Washington. We want to have meetings and do media. Can you help? And so, along with my, I ended up starting a communications firm,
Hmm.
with
Through this.
yeah.
Wow.
So my now co-founder, her name is Ariella Novak, who is just the most amazing person you'll ever meet in your
Hmm.
life. Her and we tag teamed on that, and that was how we got to know each other. Actually, was that, and
Wow.
it was the end of October of 2023, and I brought him all over the Hill, and he met with senators and congressmen, and he did Wolf Blitzer that night, I think.
Hmm.
And Jake Tapper has had him on a ton. Jake Tapper is amazing.
Hmm.
And so, yeah. And so thank God his family came back in the November deals. But we were helping his family right from the start, right from, a week in.
Mhm. Wow, look, there's the story of the October 7th, which is a world to explore. There's the story of the hostages, which is a world to explore. And then you have this un additional story here, which is the unity that this effort has brought between Israel and diaspora Jewry
Yes.
and between American Jews from different political backgrounds, religious
Mhm.
backgrounds. Can you speak about that?
Yeah, so one of the most amazing things that, I've come to realize doing this sort of back end stuff is how many people have been helping very quietly. I made a meeting with the Qataris, with one of the hostage families that I was working with, and it was a word of mouth thing. All of this is very word of mouth, and so I knew that one family had met with the Qataris that I had helped, and I didn't set that up, but I asked that family, "How did you get that meeting with the Qataris?" And he said, "This person," and he gave me his phone number, and I had met him very briefly that day when we were on the Hill. And I messaged him. I said, "Can you help me with another family?" He's like, it's turned out this is all I've been doing. And he's just a lobbyist who has good contacts in that embassy. And
Hmm.
word of mouth happened that, like, this is his very narrow line of expertise of, like, I have the contact number of everyone at the Qatari embassy in Washington,
Wow.
D.C. And so it happened a word of mouth thing where he was booking appointments with the
Hmm.
Qataris for all of these hostage families very quietly and very generously. And he's not being paid for this, but it turned into a job for him because he was doing this for everyone. And I remember I was doing it the second days of Pesach, and I was on my phone on Yentif the whole Yentif because I was trying to make this meeting with the
Hmm.
Qataris, and I was talking to the hostage family, and I apologized because I'm normally much more responsive, but I had my phone away because I didn't want to be on it in front of my
Hmm.
in-laws. Um, and I said, "I'm sorry, I'm not as responsive. I'm like sort of I come in here and I check every hour, and I'm waiting because we have been trying to make this meeting with them for months. And finally I got a bite, like, right as Antif was starting, and I said, "I'm not turning my phone off." And he said, "I'm so sorry you're breaking Antif. Like, I didn't know that you were religious." And I said, "This is like this is why exceptions are made, in my opinion. Like,
Hmm.
I'm not a doctor, but I'm not going to say to, like, the Qataris who we've been hounding for 4 months, I'm sorry, it's a Yentif, it's the second days of Passover." And so I was on my phone on the second days of Pesach, and I viewed it as like a very important thing, and I'm glad I was. And he met with the Qataris, and he a lot of it was for his emotional, you know, well-being too, that he feels like he's turning over every stone that can be unturned and that he wouldn't have regrets. And so it's really incredible the small ways that people, I mean, I know a woman who works in entertainment news who she was, contacting all of her clients and writing for them, like, statements right after October 7th. So, like, a lot of the celebrity statements that you saw, she was not just writing them for her celebrity clients, but she was writing them for other PR people in entertainment were coming to
Hmm.
her and saying, "Can you help me draft my client's statement on what happened?" And so this entertainment PR person wrote probably every single statement that you saw from a celebrity in the wake of October
Wow.
7th, and encouraged people to do that, to make those statements. She talked a lot of people into it. And so people who've used their expertise in very weird ways, very beautifully, very quietly.
Hmm. Wow. Look, obviously, hindsight is 2020, and some things you can say and some things you couldn't say. But there's a lot of voices in Israel now saying, "Oh, we should have put more pressure on Qatar. We should have put more pressure here, there." In general terms, had you known back then everything you know now, what do you think could have been done better, more effectively, to lobby support and to bring the results that we've all been praying for?
So, I mean, I was, and I remain in a little bit of a weird position because there's a lot of things, especially that the Hostage Family Forum have done that I don't agree with. I think it's very much an arm of the anti-BB protests, and they're using a lot of the hostage families as a mechanism through which to bring down BB. And I think it's very craven. That being said, they're doing really important holy work. And so it's been difficult, and I've tried to, and I think I've been pretty much successful dissociate my personal beliefs and just helping where I can and not helping, um, not doing things that I feel like are not helping. Um, but I've helped folks, with that, with the Qatari meetings. Like, I didn't think that those were necessarily helpful, but I I still made those appointments because that person wanted that and they felt like they needed that. And so, at the end of the day, it's not my family, and um, I didn't want to superimpose my beliefs on their crisis. That I didn't think that
Hmm.
that was my place. And so I would help families with messaging, especially when it came to when we were meeting with people on Capitol Hill, especially in the early days when they just did not. I mean, there was one family I brought around that didn't know the difference between a Democrat and a Republican. And so I was like, giving them pointers on, like, this is what Democrats believe, this is what Republicans believe, as we're walking from office to office, and giving them advice about, this is an effective talking point in this office. This is not an effective talking point in this office. And helping them shape their messages as best that I could, knowing the political landscape better than they did.
Hmm. Wow. And in what way would you say this hostage messaging, which, you walk on Capitol Hill and you see the hostage posters on so many congressional offices, and in that sense, it's been really, really resonating. In what way would you say that created something positive in Washington? In what way was the support for the movement to free the hostages to this moment, by the way? You saw the
Mhm.
DNC had it, the RNC had it. It did create some kind of unifying consensus, which is very rare.
Yeah.
In what way would you say it changed things for the better?
So, a nice story actually about the RNC that I think answers your question. I was there on Capitol Hill for the when Netanyahu came to give his joint address, and I met in the hallway, standing outside of Speaker Johnson's office afterwards, a woman, and she was talking to one of the families that I had been helping, and actually, I can say it's like Orna and Rona Nutra. Their son Omer was unfortunately, we now know, killed on October 7th, but at the time we thought he was being held hostage. And she said, when you spoke at the RNC, I led the chant. And how she did that was, she doesn't just, like, this crazy person standing in the back yelling, bring them home. She had positioned 10 or 15 people across the room and instructed them at, at my sign,
Hmm.
start the chant. And so it seemed very organic, but it wasn't. She very carefully orchestrated this
Hmm.
chant through the room. And it had an incredible impact because at that moment, all, all of America saw and heard thousands of people chanting, bring them home. And it wasn't organic. It was someone had very carefully orchestrated it. And that's the power of what we're doing here. And so, when I made so many appointments for families across, and I started to feel a little bad because I was going back to the same offices again and again saying, do you want to meet with this family? Do you want to meet with this family? And then asking them for favors. Like, I don't have a contact in Senator so and so's office. Can you give me the press contact in his office? And everyone was so generous, especially the Republicans. Just going to be honest.
Hmm.
Um, and I felt bad. And they wanted somebody in Senator Cotton's office said to me, first of all, this is our job. Like, we're here to talk to people.
Hmm.
But more importantly, it's important for our boss and our staff to hear these stories again and again because it fades. And having a family sitting in front of you whose daughter or son or wife or sister is being held hostage is really impactful. And we had moments where I was explaining like very basic geopolitical things to members, like not members of Congress, but their staff who are
Hmm.
not low on the totem pole. And we were explaining things, and I remember looking across the room at the family that I was with at the time, and we were like, and afterwards we looked at each other, and I said, I'm sorry, where is APAC? Like, where, why are we the ones sitting here
Hmm.
explaining like Iran funding and weapon, like why is it a hostage family and this person
Wow.
who's just volunteering walking around the hill with them? It was wild. But that was, then that staff, those staff, it was like six staffers sat down and said, what can we do in the auspices of our job and in our boss's job to move the needle forward a little bit on this. And they started brainstorming in a way that they never would have if we weren't sitting in front of them for an over an hour. And they were wonderful. Like they were sitting there. The meeting started at 4:30 and we didn't leave until 6. Like they stayed
Wow.
late. They were so invested. And those, I mean, those staffers still, whenever I see them, because I go to the Hill for lots of things, but
Hmm.
they still, they were asking me for months afterwards, is there any word? Is there
Hmm.
like they were very invested in that family story, um, because they had spent that amount of time with them.
Hmm. Wow. I remember advocating for Evan Gershkovich, who was a Wall Street
Yeah.
Journal journalist who was in Russia. And I went one day to Washington, which is, I don't live in Washington, so it was a big deal. And I come and I think it was Senator Lankford, who's like from Oklahoma, and then
Hmm.
someone from Montana who were the nicest. And I'm like,
Yeah.
he's not even, it's just sometimes just that kindness and they sit and they listen and you're like, wow, I don't know who this guy
Yeah.
is before this, but
And
it's
also
very
they're
moving.
Jew lovers. The Midwest
They,
are Jew lovers.
they're very nice.
They love our people.
You know what? The hostage messaging, thanks to you, thanks to those who've been
Many,
speaking
many
out,
people. Yeah.
has been very successful. But I will say that at the same time, one of the most shockingly successful, in a way that is terrible, but successful messaging boards of the past year and a half have been our enemies, the pro-Palestinian movement. I live close to Yale. The marketing
Yeah.
of the most barbaric and savage terrorists as freedom fighters and all that has been from a PR perspective an extraordinary
Yeah.
success. I
Yeah.
wonder from your end of things, to what extent do you think did that uh, popularity harm the cause of the hostages, the whole Free Palestine movement? To what extent did that harm the possibility of a hostage deal, of a ceasefire, or what are your thoughts in terms of how they've been doing?
Yeah. So it's actually interesting. A lot of the meetings that we had on the Hill sort of devolved a little bit, and we
Mhm.
got to talking about the funding of those movements. And I think I have some inside intel that there might be some interesting things in the next year on that front.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of it was inspired by the meetings that they were having with hostage families, not just the ones I made, but a lot of them, and a lot of
Mhm.
the work of the Foundation for Defensive Democracies, FTD. Um, really good work there. But I think that it harmed in that a lot of Americans didn't know that there were hostages being held, and that there were, I mean, there are 7 hostages left, 4 of whom are presumed to be no longer with us. Um, but
Seven
uh,
hostages left. What do you mean by that?
American
Oh, American.
hostages.
Okay.
And no one knows their names. No,
Hmm.
I like the murder of Hirsch, Goldberg, Poland should have been just wall to wall, front page news. And it really wasn't. Outside of the Jewish world, it really wasn't. And
Hmm.
I post, I mean, I have like a 9,000 followers on an Instagram. I don't have a ton of
Hmm.
followers on Instagram, but it's not insignificant.
Hmm.
And I post almost every single day about the hostages. And I hear from so many of my followers, you're the only person I see posting about this. My friend Lindsay is my only
Wow.
friend who's not Jewish who posts about it. And it was funny, she had like a hot second where she thought that she was halakhically Jewish, and I was like, you can't be Jewish. My
Hmm.
one non-Jewish friend who posts about the hostages can't
It's
claim to
like
be
it's gonna
Jewish.
ruin it all.
I know.
Hmm.
It turned out she wasn't politically Jewish, but
Hmm.
it was a close call.
Hmm.
Um, but but yeah, no, I mean it's just it's not when Iran happened. So Rachel Goldberg Poland started the movement of wearing the sticker on her shirt with the number
The
of days.
numbers, yeah.
Yeah, because during the Iran crisis, which was only 444 days, so we're past that at this point, on the local news, on the ticker on the bottom, it said the number.
Mhm.
And it really ingrained it. And so that's why she started wearing the number. Compare that to what we're seeing now. Like yellow ribbons are nowhere outside of the Jewish community.
Mhm.
And it's funny, like I very often wear the numbers when I go on television, and I hear in my ear producers saying, "Ma'am, you have a sticker on your shirt."
Oh,
And I'm
wow.
like, I know. And I mean, I've done it
Hmm.
dozens of times, and I go on the same shows, and but it's different producers sometimes. And so but even the producers don't know what the sticker
Wow.
signifies. um it's wild. The level of disconnect between non-Jewish Americans and this crisis is
Hmm.
really terrifying. I mean, we in phase one, we're God willing, seeing Keith Siegel, who's 65, and
Hmm.
Sagi Dekel Chen, who's, I think he's my age. He's like 37, 38. He has three
Hmm.
young children. They're two American citizens. And I would bet you 1 in 1,000 Americans who are not Jewish know their names. And I think that's probably, I would be surprised if it was 1 in 1,000.
Oh, in some cases you see outright cruelty. My friend Logan Levkov, who's been outspoken about the hostages, there was a famous video. She's in New York and she screams at these protesters, "Free the hostages!" And they just scream back at her, "You're never gonna see them again!" Expletive.
Yeah.
Just
So
horrible.
that happened. So I was helping two brothers, the Sharabi brothers. I was helping them with a little bit of media, and that happened to them. They were putting up hostage posters in Times Square, and people ripped them down in front of them. And these were posters of, first of all, they survived Nova. So,
Hmm.
and I mean, heroically survived Nova. If you look up, I think it was N12 did like a very long, like 8 minute segment on how they survived and saved a
Hmm.
dozen people. So first of all, they're heroes in that, respect, but they also have friends who are still being held hostage. And they were putting up their posters in Times Square and somebody ripped them down in front of them. And these are two like Israeli guys who had
Hmm.
just finished, their service. And it was infuriating to them to someone to have the chutzpah to do that in front of their faces and pretend like, I mean, they were like, we know that person. They were
Hmm.
taken from the party that I was at. And that's what's happening to these families. It's horrible. I went to Paris with my older three children in June on just a trip, and there were posters everywhere, and they were ripped down almost everywhere.
Wow. I was in the summer and on the west side, and it's just like wars, poster wars,
Yep.
just nonstop, up
Yep.
and down and up and down, and do you think that's fueled by the success of
Yeah.
the campus movement?
Yeah. They're the good guys. The people pulling down the posters of kidnapped women and children, they're the good guys. And they've deluded themselves about that fact.
Hmm.
Um, I don't understand the psychology. I used to be liberal, so I'm particularly good at putting myself in another person's shoes when it comes to
Hmm.
perspective. I don't understand it. I really don't. I mean, what offense did Kafir Bibas commit at 9 months old? What on what grounds do you feel morally justified to tear down his poster? I don't I It's a brain rot that I'm grateful to not understand.
Wow. Um, just there's so much to process here. God willing, we're gonna see phase one, we'll see phase two, we'll see phase three. God willing, everyone comes back. How do you see this trauma, which is going to be remembered throughout history? How do you see it shaping the Jewish people in the coming years? It's not something that it's just going to disappear, I assume, when the hostages return.
Yeah. I mean, I don't I I was talking with my 11-year-old who has heard and seen too many things in the last 15 months. And I was talking to her about some of the reports of what we heard about what the hostages who just were released went through. Um, and and we were sort of debating, like, what they did to Yarden Bibas. If his family are dead, and they recorded a video in which they told him they were dead, and he had to record a video
Hmm.
right after. I mean, that was torture.
Hmm.
Um, and I had to watch that video like 15 times because I had to translate it for a news station because I wanted it on air. And so I called the producer and I said, this video was just released, and I translated it word for word. And so I wrote, and my Hebrew isn't amazing, so I had to watch it 15 times to get every word. And I was telling her about it, and I was telling her about what they did to him, and uh, he's on the phase one list because they did that to him, and he's
Hmm.
coming out. And so, and we were sort of talking, and I said, what they've done to these people is a Holocaust. Obviously, they, thank God, have not gotten the numbers that they got in the Holocaust. Thank God, because of the
Hmm.
IDF, because we have a state, because we have an army.
Hmm.
Um, but this is a Holocaust, and I think that we're going to be processing that, not just my lifetime, not just my daughter's lifetime, but we see the trauma of the Holocaust carrying through to future generations, and I think we're going to see that
Hmm.
again, and we've really, I think, lost our sense of innocence and naivete, that that kind of evil is relegated to the past because it's not.
Hmm. One final question, hopefully on a also positive note, if you can find such a thing in all of this. Uh, what are like three things that you've learned? And I mean, you started a firm in the wake of all of this. You've done extraordinary work. You've c connected with so many people. What are three things that you've learned in this process from the moment that you were contacted by hostage families to this day, where, God willing, hopefully we see many more coming back?
Yeah. So a lot of what, I mean, we have clients that, are paid clients, but I think the work that I want to do, that I think has been inspiring, is continuing to educate journalists and bookers and people on Capitol Hill. And that's so we have a nonprofit arm of what we're doing.
Hmm.
Shield Giving is what it's called. And just getting these folks to Israel, who are working in newsrooms. We've already done one trip, and we're fundraising for more. And that's sort of what we've decided we're going to do, is get journalists and bookers and producers to Israel and see it for themselves, because I think that
Hmm.
will do a lot to eat away at the media bias that we're seeing, because there are friendly folks in newsrooms, and you'd be
Hmm.
surprised which newsrooms, and they just need that connection, and that connection and that information. Um, and so I think that's been very inspiring. And then continuing, the friendships that I've made with folks on the Hill, and I've become their like juice splainer, and
Hmm.
continuing that work as a juice splainer
Hmm.
informally.
Wow. All right. Bethany Mandel, Shield Communication PR, and just someone who's been doing such extraordinary work helping hostages, families, get the message, speak to the media, Capitol Hill. Thank you for the work you do. And together with you and everyone else, where our eyes are hoping to see the release of more hostages. Thank you for everything you do. And it looks like many, many more good deeds ahead.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.